Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Joseph Butler and the Analogy of Religion, first published in 1736, and we are working off of a 1906 copy of that 1736 publication. We're going to take a look at pages 42 to page 62, and we're primarily going to focus on a concept that is introduced by Butler concerning the natural providence of God, and it's the concept of tendency. He's going to bring up the concept of tendency to support his analogous apologetics in defending the Christian faith. And like we did last time, let's take a look at the top right of the chart and take a look at the column 4. And I've got a little inserted triad there we can look at that'll help us frame the lesson that we're going to be looking at. And basically we're looking at the movement of righteousness in present existence, which is the state of probation according to Joseph Butler. So in this state of probation, we have the communal mind, which defines virtue as veracity, justice, and charity, and then the communal wisdom posits a schema model of the divine providence in order to participate in and move creation forward toward the fulfillment of kingdom. And all of that becomes, in the third moment there, the uniformity of right becomes actualized through the communal work space of analogy. So this uniformity of right needs to be moved forward, and it moves forward by the individual self getting involved in communal mind and communal wisdom. In other words, get involved in the community dialogue, and then by getting involved in dialogue, we can expand that compass of knowledge, and we can perceive those tendencies toward the right that exist in existence and take them up and form a schema model of providence. So keep that in mind as we go through the lesson. Let's take a look at block 1 and the positing of virtue. And Butler says that the effect of the act of virtue is the result of peace and delight. Additionally, happiness and misery are communal powers. The human mind is naturally inclined toward veracity, justice, and charity, but the realization of happiness or the consequence of misery is basically a power that is a communal power. It involves community. Now a note too, the unnatural self is the self that actually perverts his character. Experience teaches us that happiness and misery are distributed under the direction of other rules, and those other rules are the general laws. And Butler says that the voice of nature declares the conduct of providence. So within the natural world, there is a graspable conduct of providence. It is being voiced. You could use the Greek rhema here, but it is being voiced, and it is graspable, and it does declare within that conduct of providence that there's a preference for virtue. So any disorder in consequences, according to Butler, is artificial and a perversion. And this is key to understand that within natural reality, within the natural realm, Butler says the conduct of providence, the moral conduct of providence, is a graspable presence because we actually can discern its voice. the voice within nature of this conduct of providence, and it will show a preference for virtue. This is all graspable within the natural realm. Now note 3, the self's participation in this divine administration. Our participation brings about a secret satisfaction of truly being satisfied by virtue, and by bringing forth virtue, we have the experience of security, and we have a true positive hope for the future. And then here's the key. There are, within natural reality, there are objective tendencies that ask to be actualized. They are discernible instances of moral constitution. So there are these entry nodal points within reality, within our own historical situation. There are these tendencies on the verge of being actualized that ask for our participation, and they are, quote, instances of moral constitution that are tendencies within reality. And they're all abbreviated under the direction of reason, which empowers our participation. And he goes on to say that accident versus reason, that is the ongoing conflict and the ongoing struggle in reality. It's a struggle between brute accident and reason, which serves the moral administration. And just as there is a preference for virtue, reason does have an advantage over accidental brute force. And if you look at note 4 there, reason as an advantageous tendency. Communal reason supplies the greatest advantage for participating in this conduct of providence. Communal reason abbreviates the concretion of civil government, the inventions of art, and tradition or preserved experience. That would be our tradition that we hold, the traditions of our communal participation together. There's a preserved experience in tradition. But we can participate in this conduct of providence, and we can perceive a preference for virtue in it. That's the key thing being stated here in Block 1. Now, Block 2, we get a look at the societal good. We've taken a look at the concept of virtue. Now we look at societal good. Societal good is, or the public good, is posited as an eschatological end. The community takes up the actions of consideration and diligence and recollection in order to posit this eschatological end. And this positing of the virtue as an eschatological end is acquired through, again, key here, we move into communal dialogue. That workspace of analogy is the workspace of communal dialogue. Aristotle's De Kunta threshold. It is that place where we gather in communal exchange of ideas, and through the communal exchange of ideas, a positing of virtue within the conduct of providence can be discovered and articulated. And then Butler goes on to talk about the societal concepts of veracity and justice. Veracity and justice become a binding force of our society. There's a hidden dispensation of providence in our society, that conduct of providence. There's a hidden binding force. There's a hidden dispensation of this conduct of providence. It is present as a uniform or a uniformity of schema. It is not just those instances of tendency, but those instances of tendency are combined to present to us, although concealed and hidden, we can perceive a uniformity of schema of the divine providence, of the conduct of providence. The schema is present. And it all can be derived by the natural human reason. Eschatological time is posited, and reason will succeed gradually. That's why the concept of eschatological time has to be posited. And then again, that concept of tendency comes up. We grasp the occasions of tendency within our reality, and tendency is that which battles against the accidental brute forces that try to delay tendency from being actualized. They fight against virtue becoming actualized. The self supports tendency by positing anticipatory spheres of action, those models or those schemas of providence. So through communal dialogue, we posit schema models of providence that help to take up these instances or these occasions of tendency that are asking to be actualized. So let's take a look at note 3. Let's take a look at the schema of providence. Hindrances are removed through the positing of future states. It's posited as a schema model, and this model is formed out of the united wisdom of the community. The schema model is a communally discovered model. We gather in community with what? Dokeo suppositions, dokeo presumptions. We want to move on to greater and greater and greater probability, greater depth of probability. We do that through communal dialogue, and in that way we can form that sphere of the model of providence, the schema of the model of providence. All formed through the united wisdom of community, and the system of religion has a role here in positing and sustaining uniformity, morality, and justice of the right. The uniformity of the movement of providence. Religion will help to see that and teach that. Then upholding the essential attribute of morality and positing the justice of the right. And the way of analogy brings the confirmations forward for this belief in an overall schema. The way of analogy. That goes right back to our introductory lesson, but the way of analogy is the way to reach the confirmations for our overall positing of a schema of the conduct of providence. So keep that in mind. Let's take a look at subnote 1 there on consequences. Experience possesses consequences for virtue and vice. They are built in. Distributive justice is also present in experience. There's an internalization of happiness and misery, creating the anticipation of a future state, and the presence of tendencies supports the notion of schema. The presence of tendencies supports the notion of schema. So we have a methodology, we have an objective disposition, and a tendency, occasions of tendency, that all contributes to the self notion of future state. We can posit a schema of future state. We can posit an eschatological schema of future state because through the compass of our own natural knowledge we can perceive the occasions of tendency, and we can form this holistic schema of the conduct of providence and posit that as our notion of a hoped for schema state, future state. And it's something we need to talk about right here just momentarily, but after going through block 1 and block 2, you have to really understand this is all written by Joseph Butler in 1736. And look how proleptic this truth was, how great of a truth he is teaching here in 1736, because it sounds a great deal like Jürgen Moltmann in the 20th century, in the 21st century. It sounds a great deal like Moltmann's theology of hope and promise and expectation and tendency. Moltmann greatly brought up a central concept of tendency. So we're really looking at a very early apologetics of hope, a very early apologetics of hope and tendency and promise, and very, very much a forerunner. I see a lot of similarity here in what comes much, much later in Moltmann's theology of hope. So we're getting these ideas of hope and tendency and promise and the schema for the conduct of providence, all which are discernible because we are endowed with the compass of knowledge that is capable of discerning this conduct of providence. But we get the glimpses through these occasions of tendency. Let's take a look at block 3, take a look at virtue and societal good combine to define our present state of probation. Our present existence is in a state of probation. With note 1, the objective moral government is natural. The author of nature is for virtue and against vice. Those preferences appear as natural tendencies, and they're up against artificial hindrances. So right away, Butler says that the virtue is a naturally discernible tendency within our reality, and a future moral schema encloses these tendencies. Now, note 2, the subjective grasping. There are implicit promises that we take up. We do anticipate a future greater reward through the way of analogy and grasping this future moral schema. We internalize all of this as anticipations, or what Butler calls presuppositions. And self does coordinate this promise, and this anticipation informs a schema of administration and posits this hopeful schema of administration. This is powerful, powerful phenomenology here. This is tremendous teaching from Butler, very powerful teaching, that we have all of this present in our present state of probation. So note 3, block 3, note 3, the state of probation. The self-existence is in a state of probation, looking toward future state. The self is empowered with the capacities for scope and opportunity. These opportunities are mediated through the conflict between temptations and reason. But all this is enclosed within a moral government. The notion of future account is posited, and it's coupled with the imperative to be aligned with the uniformity of the right. This providence allows us to grasp it as a uniformity of the right, a uniformity of justice, a uniformity of dikaiosune righteousness. The role of religion is to teach moral government, the moral government of providence, the conduct of providence, and through moral government, God does annex pleasure with the act of virtue and pain with the act of vice. Therefore, note 4, first, objective moral government is evident as tendencies and schema of a future state. 2, tendencies are grasped as promise and anticipation and systematized as schema. 3, probation state defines the current existence of observation and reflection, enclosed within a battle between temptation and reason. Now, I confess there is a tremendous amount of deep content in these 20 pages, but it is clearly taught by Joseph Butler, and it is certainly graspable, and I can certainly agree with what he's teaching here, because I already agree with the teaching that I've received from Jürgen Moltmann. But these are great teachings on the concept of tendency, the ability to grasp the conduct of providence through seeing these occasions of tendency and then organizing them into a schema of a future state that we anticipate and posit in order to move the preference for virtue forward. To move that preference for virtue forward. Now we can take a look at our block 4 of column 4. And in column 4, we're going to take a look at this movement again. But let's do a little quick recap on that triad at the top of column 4. The communal mind defines virtue as veracity, justice, and charity. Communal wisdom then posits the schema model of providence. That reaches the uniformity of right being actualized. And all three moments hover around these occasions of tendency that are present in reality. So column 4, note 1, the state of probation and its capacities. There's temporal capacity to forego the greater good for a present gratification. There's religious capacity to forego a future virtue for a lesser present good. Those who live according to present gratification have hardened themselves toward the feeling for consequences. They're blinded by inordinate passion. They have feeble resolutions toward virtue. They also have a corruption of religion into superstition because they take up a mistaken positing of signs. And then note 3, the path of conduct. Wrong behavior creates a state of degradation. Moral behavior follows the teaching of religion. The human compass of knowledge is capable of grasping the uniformity of providence. That's key in this lesson. I'll say it again. The human compass of knowledge is capable of grasping the uniformity of providence in the natural world. It's possible because the self is innately endowed with a present interest or a present tendency toward recognizing this uniformity within reality, this uniformity of providence. Therefore, note 4, therefore, the state of probation possesses two capacities: the temporal, which foregoes the greater good for immediate gratification; the religious, which foregoes future virtue for immediate lesser good. 2. Negation. The self should negate life according to present gratification, which is hardened against consideration of consequences, and has a distorted religion, into superstition. 3. The self possesses an interest for virtue, a present interest, an innate conscience, which makes the grasping of providence through the compass of knowledge possible. Tremendous teaching from Joseph Butler, but to recap, just make that recall triad, that little top inserted triad at the top of column 4. Communal mind defines virtue as veracity, justice, and charity. Communal wisdom posits a schema model of hope, of the conduct of providence. That will move the uniformity of right forward. It will actualize the uniformity of right. And it all takes place in the workspace of the way of analogy. That's going to wrap up this lesson, but it's a tremendous lesson. I mean, it's just a huge amount of content in 20 pages, but true brilliance from Joseph Butler here. True brilliance on the discussion of the occasions of tendency. The occasions of tendency.